The restaurant was always busy on Friday nights. The air smelled of roasted herbs and coffee, the soft sound of cutlery and chatter filling the space. Among the servers moving between the tables was a young waitress named Lena. She worked quietly, always polite, always moving fast so no customer had to wait too long. To most people, she was just another face in a black and white uniform, blending into the background of an elegant place where people came to show off their wealth and taste. But when the piano music started each night, Lena's eyes would drift toward the corner of the room where a grand piano stood. A professional pianist sat there, his fingers dancing over the keys, filling the room with melodies that matched the clinking glasses and low laughter. Each note stirred something deep inside her. She often found herself pausing for a second too long while placing dishes, just to listen. Her heart followed every tune, every soft touch on the keys. She couldn't help it. The piano reminded her of a different time, a time when she believed music was her future. Years ago, Lena had been a student at a small community music school. Her teacher used to say she had a gift, a natural understanding of rhythm and emotion. She could play long hours losing herself in the sound. Her father used to listen to her practice after work, his tired face softening as the music filled their small apartment. But everything changed when he got sick. Hospital bills piled up and Lena had to find a job to help pay them. The piano lessons stopped. The dream faded quietly as life's weight grew heavier. When her father passed away, the piano keys felt cold to her. She never touched them again. Now, years later, she was serving soup and coffee to people who had no idea that she could once play pieces that made others close their eyes and smile. Sometimes, late at night after work, she'd sit on her small balcony, close her eyes and imagine the piano under her fingers again. But reality always pulled her back. Dreams didn't pay the bills. So she kept moving. Table to table, day after day, her coworkers liked her. She wasn't loud like some of them. She was calm, always helping others when they were in a rush. They joked sometimes, calling her the quiet one, because she rarely joined in gossip or laughter. But there was something gentle about her that made people feel comfortable. Some nights, when the restaurant closed and they cleaned up, Lena would hum softly to herself while wiping tables. Her fingers would move as if playing invisible keys on the wooden surface. The others would tease her playfully, saying she was pretending to be a pianist. She'd just smile and shake her head, never explaining that it wasn't pretending. It was remembering. The restaurant was beautiful, especially under the soft yellow lights that reflected off the crystal glasses and polished wood. It was a place where wealthy guests came for anniversaries, business meetings, or to impress someone. Lena had learned to read their moods, who wanted to be left alone, who wanted attention, who was polite, and who saw her as invisible. She didn't take it personally. Life had taught her to stay steady no matter how people treated her. Her focus was on doing her job right, saving a little money each month, and maybe one day studying again. It was a quiet hope she never spoke out loud. One night, as the pianist played a slow classical tune, a small girl entered with her parents. They sat near the piano. The girl watched the musician with wide eyes, her hands moving in the air as if she were playing along. Lena noticed it while pouring water at another table and smiled to herself. She saw her younger self in that girl, full of wonder, full of dreams. The girl's parents laughed softly and told her to sit still, but she couldn't stop. Music had its own magic, one Lena knew too well. During her short breaks, Lena sometimes stood in the back hallway where she could hear the piano clearly, but be unseen. She leaned against the wall, closed her eyes, and let the music take her somewhere else. The melody reminded her of rainy afternoons when she practiced at home. Her father sitting in his old chair, tapping his fingers to the rhythm. The memories were both sweet and painful. They gave her strength but also made her ache inside. When the music stopped, she always sighed quietly before going back to work. Her life outside the restaurant was simple. She lived in a small apartment with old furniture and a second-hand keyboard she had bought years ago but rarely played. It sat near her window covered with a thin layer of dust. Sometimes on her days off she would clean it, run her fingers across the plastic keys and press one or two just to hear the sound. It was never the same as a real piano. The keys felt too light, too shallow. But when she played softly, even for a few minutes, her heart calmed down. Those moments reminded her that music was still inside her, just sleeping, waiting. Her morning started early. She'd walk to work with a cup of coffee in hand, watching the city wake up. She liked the sound of footsteps, car horns, and people talking on phones. It all blended into a kind of rhythm like an accidental song. Sometimes, she tapped her fingers on the cup, following that beat. No one noticed. They saw a waitress walking to work, not a musician listening to the music of the streets. The restaurant owner, Mr. Harding, was strict but fair. He liked order and respected those who worked hard. He didn't know much about Lena's past, only that she was reliable and never late. She was the kind of worker every manager wanted, quiet, steady, and responsible. He sometimes asked her to stay overtime when someone called in sick, and she never refused. He often told her, "You've got a calm spirit." "Lena, that's rare in this business." She'd smile politely and thank him, though she never really knew what to say to compliments. As weeks passed, Lena's routine became almost like clockwork. She had memorized the pianist's schedule and the order of songs he played. Some she recognized, Chopin, Mozart, Beethoven. Others were his own compositions. She admired how easily he played, though sometimes she noticed his lack of emotion. It was beautiful but cold, like someone repeating something they'd done too many times. She wondered what it would feel like to sit there in front of that shining instrument and play from the heart again. Then she shook the thought away. That wasn't her life anymore. One evening near closing time, the pianist took a short break, leaving the piano silent for a few minutes. The restaurant felt strangely empty without music. Lena was cleaning a table nearby when her coworker joked, "Why don't you play something, Lena? You're always airplaying anyway." She smiled but didn't answer. Inside, her hands itched to touch the keys even just once. But she knew she couldn't. This was her workplace, not her stage. So she continued wiping the table, pretending she didn't care. Still, as she walked away, she glanced at the piano one last time, her reflection faintly visible in its polished surface. For a moment she imagined sitting there, her fingers finding the old rhythm, her heart lifting as sound filled the air again. It was a fleeting dream, gone as soon as she blinked. That night after closing, she stayed a little longer than usual, helping the others clean up. The restaurant was quiet now, the chairs stacked, the lights dimmed. When everyone left, Lena lingered by the piano. Her heart beat faster as she reached out and touched one of the keys softly. The sound was warm, real, alive. She smiled faintly, whispering to herself, "Still the same." Then she straightened up quickly, grabbed her bag, and left before anyone could see. Outside, the city lights reflected in puddles from the earlier rain. She walked home slowly, humming the tune she had played in her mind all night. Her reflection in the shop windows looked tired but calm. Deep down, she didn't know that life was quietly preparing something for her, a moment that would soon change everything. But for now, she was just a waitress walking home, holding on to a melody only she could hear. The next Friday night was busier than usual. The restaurant glowed with golden lights, the smell of expensive food drifting through the air. Lena could feel the difference as soon as she walked in. Every table was booked, and the manager had called an early meeting to remind everyone that tonight's guests were very important. It wasn't just a normal dinner service. It was an exclusive event for some of the city's richest and most well-known people, business owners, musicians, and even a few local celebrities. The atmosphere felt heavier than usual. The waiters straightened their uniforms, and the kitchen buzzed with extra energy. Lena listened carefully to the instructions, nodding quietly as the manager spoke. She was used to these high-pressure nights. They were stressful, but also the best time to earn good tips. She tied her apron neatly and got to work, setting the tables, checking the glasses for smudges, and making sure the candles were all lit. By 7 o'clock, the first guests began arriving. The sound of laughter and expensive perfume filled the air. People greeted one another with hugs and cheek kisses, talking loudly about travel, art, and business. The restaurant's pianist, a tall man in a black suit, began playing soft background music that floated through the room. It gave everything a touch of elegance. Lena carried trays back and forth, serving drinks and appetizers while keeping her calm smile in place. Even though she had done this 100 times, something about that night felt different. Maybe it was the excitement, or maybe it was the way her eyes kept drifting toward the piano. The instrument seemed to shine more brightly than usual under the warm lights. Every time the pianist played a familiar tune, she felt that old tug in her heart again. But she kept her focus on her work. Dreams had no place in a room like this. Halfway through the evening, a loud laugh rose from one of the larger tables. A few guests were teasing the pianist between songs, asking him to play something more modern, something fun. He smiled politely and agreed, switching from classical to a jazz number. The crowd clapped along, and for a moment the atmosphere turned lighthearted. Lena watched as people swayed to the rhythm, their worries forgotten for a few minutes. It reminded her how powerful music could be, how it could change a whole room in seconds. She was serving wine to a group near the back when she noticed the manager looking tense. He kept checking his watch and glancing toward the door. Something was clearly wrong. A few minutes later, the pianist suddenly stopped mid-song. He frowned and spoke quietly to the manager. Lena couldn't hear what they said, but she could see the frustration on both their faces. Then the pianist stood up, shook his head, and walked away toward the exit. The music stopped. The sound of chatter filled the silence that followed. Lena froze for a moment, tray in hand. The room suddenly felt too quiet. People began whispering, wondering what had happened. The manager hurried after the pianist, trying to calm him down, but it was no use. The man grabbed his coat and left through the front door, leaving behind an awkward stillness. The piano sat empty in the corner like a beautiful ornament that no one dared to touch. The manager returned, his face pale. He tried to reassure the guests that everything was fine, but the crowd's mood had shifted. The expensive laughter and sparkle in the air had faded. The event had lost its rhythm. In the middle of all this, Lena stood near the service station, feeling an ache deep in her chest. She wanted to help, but what could a waitress possibly do? She looked at the piano again, its keys gleaming under the soft lights. She could almost hear the music in her head, the way it should sound, gentle, emotional, alive. The silence felt wrong. As the minutes passed, the tension grew. Guests began to murmur impatiently, asking when the music would resume. The manager rubbed his forehead, looking completely lost. He whispered to another staff member, asking if anyone knew how to play even a few songs. No one did. The restaurant's elegant atmosphere was slipping away, and with it, the success of the night. Lena took a deep breath. Her heart pounded so hard it almost hurt. She walked slowly toward the manager, unsure of what she was doing. When he noticed her standing there, he looked surprised. "What is it, Lena?" he asked, his voice tight. I can play," she said softly. He blinked. "Play? You mean the piano?" She nodded nervously.
A little.
"Just until you find someone else." For a second, he just stared at her. Then he gave a short, nervous laugh. "That's sweet, Lena, but we can't take that kind of risk. These guests expect a professional. We can't have a waitress sitting there." She nodded quickly, embarrassed. "I understand. I just thought..." Before she could finish, one of the guests nearby overheard. A woman in a red dress turned around, smiling in amusement. "Did I hear that right? The waitress wants to play?" she said loudly, catching everyone's attention, and a few people laughed. Others turned to look, curiosity in their eyes. Lena felt her cheeks burn. The manager tried to wave it off, but the guests had already picked up on it. A man at the same table chuckled. "Oh, let her try, why not? It might be entertaining." His tone was playful, but it carried that sharp edge of someone who thought the idea was ridiculous. The manager hesitated. He could feel the pressure from the crowd. The event was falling apart, and he was out of options. He sighed and looked at Lena. "Are you sure you can play something simple? Something soft?" "Yes," she said quietly, though her hands were trembling. "Fine," he said at last. "Just one song. If it doesn't go well, stop immediately." She nodded, her heart racing. She untied her apron slowly and placed it on the counter. The room watched in silence as she walked toward the piano. Every step felt heavier than the last. She could feel the guests' eyes following her, some with curiosity, others with disbelief. No one expected anything more than a clumsy attempt. To them, it was just a moment of distraction. When she reached the piano, she paused and looked down at the keys. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the polished surface. It had been so long since she last touched a real instrument. Her fingers hovered above the keys, her breath shaky. For a moment, doubt filled her mind. What if she failed? What if they laughed? But deep down, something stronger than fear whispered, "Just play." She closed her eyes and pressed the first key. The sound was clear and gentle. Then came another note and another, like soft raindrops. The melody began to take shape. Uncertain at first, then smoother as her fingers remembered what they once knew so well. The music flowed through her like a memory waking up. Each note carried emotion she had held inside for years. The crowd fell silent. The laughter and whispers stopped. Even the waiters paused mid-step. The manager, who had been standing with his arms crossed, slowly lowered them. The woman in red leaned forward, her expression changing from amusement to surprise. Lena played with her whole heart. She didn't think about technique or perfection. She just let the music speak. Her body relaxed, her mind clear. It was as if the piano had been waiting for her all this time, and now it was telling her story, one of struggle, loss, and quiet strength. The notes filled the restaurant with warmth, soft but powerful. People listened, not just with their ears but with their hearts. Even the clinking of glasses had stopped. The sound of her playing was gentle yet full of emotion, something real and human. It wasn't about showing off. It was about feeling. When she reached the end, she let the final note linger in the air before slowly lifting her hands. The silence that followed was deep. For a few seconds, no one moved or spoke. Then suddenly, applause erupted, first softly, then louder and louder until the entire restaurant was clapping. Some stood from their chairs. A few even wiped tears from their eyes. Lena sat there, stunned. She hadn't expected this. Her heart swelled and she smiled shyly, her cheeks still red. The manager looked at her in disbelief, his mouth slightly open. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but he knew he had witnessed something special. A man from the audience walked up and asked if she had ever studied music. She simply said, "A long time ago." He smiled and told her she had a rare gift. The guests began talking excitedly again, but this time about her. The energy in the room was completely different. Warm, alive, full of admiration. As Lena stood up and stepped away from the piano, she felt light, almost unreal. For the first time in years, she had played again. And though she didn't know it yet, that small moment would be the beginning of a new chapter in her life. One she never dared to imagine could happen again. After that night, nothing felt the same for Lena. The next morning, when she came into work, her coworkers greeted her with big smiles and teasing applause. Someone had recorded her playing on their phone, and by morning the video had already been shared around the staff group chat. The quiet, humble waitress who had always stayed in the background was now the person everyone wanted to talk to. "Lena, you never told us you could play like that," one of the servers said as they set up tables for the day. Another added, "You made people cry last night." Even Mr. Harding looked like he was going to tear up. They laughed, but there was genuine admiration in their voices. Lena just smiled, embarrassed. She didn't know what to say. It all still felt unreal. When the manager walked in, the room quieted a little. Lena half expected him to scold her for doing something outside her job. But instead he gave her a long look before saying, "You saved us last night. I won't forget that." His voice was calm but kind. Then after a pause he added, "And that was something special. I've never seen the guests that quiet before." Lena thanked him softly, still feeling shy. She wasn't used to attention. It made her uncomfortable, even though part of her heart felt light, like someone had lifted a heavy weight she didn't know she was carrying. For the first time in years, she had played music in front of people, and they had loved it. That night after work, she couldn't sleep. She sat on her small bed watching the lights flicker outside her window. On her phone, she opened the video that one of her coworkers had sent her. It was short, shaky, but it captured everything. Her sitting at the piano, the crowd falling silent, and the final note hanging in the air. At the end, the camera turned, showing people standing and clapping. She watched it twice, her eyes wet. For the first time in so long, she didn't feel like a waitress pretending to be fine. She felt like herself again. The next few days, the story of the waitress pianist began to spread beyond the restaurant. The video found its way to social media. People shared it with captions like, "Talent can come from anywhere," and "A reminder never to judge by appearances." Strangers commented, praising her natural emotion and calling her performance beautiful. Some even asked who she was and whether she played anywhere else. Lena didn't know any of this until her coworker showed her a post with thousands of views. She couldn't believe it. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the comments. Part of her wanted to hide. Part of her wanted to cry. She wasn't used to praise. For years, she had convinced herself that music belonged to a world she no longer lived in. But now that world was reaching back to her. One evening, as she was finishing her shift, a middle-aged man approached her table. He introduced himself politely and said he had been at the restaurant the night she played. "I work in the music department at the city college," he explained. "I wanted to tell you that what you did that night moved everyone in the room. You have real talent. Have you ever thought about playing again professionally?" Lena froze, unsure how to answer. "I used to play," she said slowly. "But it's been a long time. I stopped when my father got sick." The man nodded with understanding. "Life gets in the way sometimes, but the gift you have doesn't disappear. You should think about developing it again. If you'd like, I can help connect you with a few people." He handed her his business card and smiled kindly before leaving. She stood there for a long time, the small card trembling in her hand. She had no idea what to say or do. Could she really start again after all these years? It felt impossible, and yet, for the first time, not completely out of reach. That night, she went home and took the old keyboard from under the cloth that had covered it for years. She wiped off the dust and sat quietly, her fingers hovering over the keys. She started playing softly, hesitant at first, then stronger as her memory returned. It wasn't perfect, her timing was off, and her fingers were stiff. But the feeling was there. The joy, the release, the emotion she thought she had lost was still alive inside her. As the notes filled her small apartment, she smiled to herself. She could almost feel her father there, nodding along like he used to. The sound wasn't beautiful like a grand piano's, but it was real and it was hers. Days turned into weeks, and little by little, things began to change for her. Guests at the restaurant started recognizing her. Some asked, "Are you the one who played that night?" Others requested that she perform again. The manager, seeing how much people loved her story, began asking if she could play a short piece at the end of the evening. Lena hesitated at first, but eventually agreed. Each night she played, the room fell silent just like before. Her music wasn't fancy, but it carried something honest, something people could feel. Soon, more people began visiting the restaurant, hoping to hear the waitress pianist. What used to be an ordinary job now carried a quiet kind of pride. Lena still served food, cleaned tables, and took orders, but now she also brought music to the room. Some nights she would play her own melodies, little pieces she had written long ago but never shared. Each one told a story about her father, her childhood, and the years she had spent hiding her gift. Her co-workers supported her completely. They cheered her on and often stood near the kitchen door, secretly listening whenever she played. The manager, who once seemed skeptical, now looked at her with respect. He even bought her a small bouquet one night, saying, "You've brought something special to this place. People come for the food, but they stay for the feeling you give them." Lena thanked him quietly. She didn't need much, just the chance to play and share her heart again. But one evening, something unexpected happened. A well-dressed woman approached her after her performance. She introduced herself as a music producer who worked with independent artists. "Your performance has gone viral," she said kindly. "People are sharing your story everywhere. I think you could really do something with this. Would you be interested in recording?" Lena was speechless. She had never imagined such a thing. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've never recorded before." "I'm just a waitress," the woman smiled warmly. "Maybe. But last night you weren't a waitress and you were an artist. And people felt it. That's what matters." She gave Lena her card and told her to think about it. After she left, Lena sat in the empty restaurant for a long time, her hands resting on the piano. The thought of stepping into the world of music again scared her, but it also filled her with a deep, quiet excitement. For so long she had worked in silence, believing her dreams were gone, but now that silence had been replaced by applause, kindness, and possibility. Later that night, as she walked home, she took out her phone and looked again at the video of her first performance. She noticed something she hadn't before, the way people in the background were smiling, how their faces softened as the music played. She realized it wasn't just about her or the piano. It was about connection. Her music had reached people who didn't even know her. It reminded them, and her, that everyone carries something beautiful inside, even if life hides it for a while. When she reached her apartment, she sat at her keyboard again. This time she didn't just play old pieces. She started creating something new, a song that told her story from the beginning. The girl who lost her dream found it again by accident and learned that it was never really gone. She played until the sky outside turned gray with dawn. As she looked out the window, the city waking up around her, she whispered softly, "Maybe this is my second chance." And somewhere inside, she knew that this was only the beginning of something she had waited her whole life to feel again. The chance to let her music speak to the world. Weeks passed and Lena's life started changing in quiet, unexpected ways. The restaurant that once felt like just a workplace now felt like the place where everything had begun again. People came not only for the food but also hoping to hear her play. Sometimes she would perform near the end of the evening. After most of the guests had finished their meals, the room would grow still, and the sound of her music would fill the space with calm and emotion. Even those who didn't understand much about music could feel something when she played. There was honesty in her touch, a softness that came from living through both joy and pain. But success also brought new pressure. Some nights she worried that she wouldn't live up to people's expectations. The thought of disappointing them made her nervous. Before every performance, she sat in the staff room for a few minutes, breathing deeply, whispering to herself, "Just play with your heart, not your fear." Then she'd walk out, sit at the piano and lose herself in the sound, and somehow it always worked. One evening, the restaurant was busier than usual. It was a private event for a charity foundation, attended by some well-known guests. The manager was proud to have them and asked Lena if she could play something special. She agreed, though her hands trembled a little as she tied her apron. When the time came, she sat at the piano, looked around the quiet room and began playing a melody she had written herself. It was soft and hopeful, like sunlight after rain. By the time she finished, the crowd gave her a warm, gentle applause. Some stood up. A few came over to thank her personally. Among them was a man who introduced himself as a local concert organizer. He told her he was deeply moved by her playing and asked if she would consider performing at a community music event the following month. At first, Lena hesitated. She had never performed on a stage since her childhood recitals. The idea of playing for a big audience scared her. But the man's kind tone and the encouragement from her co-workers helped her say yes. It was only one piece, he said. Something simple, just to share her story. She nodded, unsure but curious to see where it might lead. After work, she walked home through the cool night air, thinking about the offer. The idea of standing in front of strangers with all eyes on her made her stomach twist. But deep inside, there was also a spark of excitement. Maybe this was her chance to step into the world she had once dreamed of. Maybe it was life giving her a quiet invitation to start again. Over the next few weeks, Lena practiced every night after work. Her apartment was small, but the sound of her keyboard echoed softly through the walls. She chose a piece that meant something to her, a song she had written years ago when her father was sick. It was emotional but peaceful, like a memory of love and loss at the same time. Whenever she played it, she felt close to him again. It gave her strength. Sometimes her neighbors would pause by her door to listen. One older woman even knocked one evening to tell her how beautiful the music was. "It makes me feel calm," the woman said with a smile. Those small moments reminded Lena that music didn't need fancy stages or large audiences to touch hearts. The night of the concert arrived faster than she expected. The event was held in a local hall decorated with lights and flowers. It wasn't huge, but to her it felt grand. Musicians of all kinds were performing. Singers, violinists, and even a small children's choir. Lena stood backstage, watching them with awe. She wore a simple dress and held her hands together tightly to keep them from shaking. When her name was announced, her legs felt weak. The host introduced her as the Waitress pianist whose story touched so many hearts. The audience clapped politely. She walked out, her step slow and careful, her breath shallow. The piano stood under a soft light at the center of the stage. She sat down, her heart racing so fast she thought the crowd might hear it. For a moment, she just looked at the keys. The noise of the audience faded away. All she could hear was her own breathing. Then she remembered what her father used to say whenever she was nervous before a recital. "Don't play for them. Play for yourself." She smiled faintly, took a deep breath and began. The first few notes were shaky, but as she continued, the music started to flow naturally. Her fingers remembered what her mind had forgotten. She poured her heart into every sound, every pause, every change in rhythm. The melody rose and fell like waves, gentle, full of emotion, yet strong enough to fill the whole hall. By the time she reached the end, the room was silent. The last note lingered in the air like a breath that refused to fade. Then came the applause, soft at first, then louder, then standing. People were clapping, cheering, some even calling her name. Lena sat still, overwhelmed. She looked at the audience, seeing faces full of warmth and admiration. Tears filled her eyes, and she smiled through them, bowing slightly before leaving the stage. Backstage, other performers congratulated her. The organizer found her and said, "You didn't just play a song. You told a story. That's what real music is." He offered her a small spot in another event the following month, this time at a bigger venue. Lena was surprised but grateful. Her life, which had once felt so predictable, now seemed full of unexpected doors opening one after another. When she returned to work the next day, her coworkers celebrated her again. They had watched the video online, which had already gathered thousands of views. The manager smiled proudly and said, "You're becoming our restaurant's good luck charm." She laughed softly, still shy about all the attention, but she couldn't deny how happy she felt inside. More invitations followed. Small performances, charity events, community gatherings. People wanted to hear her play. Lena balanced it all with her job, working during the day and performing at night. It was exhausting, but she didn't mind. Every time she sat at a piano, she felt alive. The applause didn't matter as much as the feeling of connection, knowing that her music reached people, reminded them of something good, something real. One evening after a long performance, she sat alone in the empty hall, the lights dimmed and the piano still warm from her touch. She thought about the journey that had brought her there, the years of struggle, the endless work shifts, the quiet dreams she had buried. And then she thought about that one night at the restaurant when everything changed. All it took was one small moment of courage. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from the woman who had once offered her a recording opportunity. The message said simply, "People are still talking about your performance. Let's make something beautiful together." Lena stared at it for a long time. Part of her still hesitated. Recording felt too big, too unreal. But another part of her whispered, "Maybe it's time." That night, back home, she opened her old notebook where she used to write music. The pages were yellowed, filled with half-finished melodies and little notes her father had once written in the margins. She began working again, shaping old tunes into new ones, adding words and emotions she had gathered over the years. She stayed up late, writing and playing until her fingers ached. For the first time in a long time, Lena wasn't just chasing a dream. She was living it. Her life still wasn't perfect. She still worked long shifts, still worried about bills, still had moments of doubt. But now there was music in her days again, a reason to wake up with hope. One night, after everyone left the restaurant, she sat at the piano alone. The lights were dim, and outside rain tapped softly on the windows. She played quietly to herself, her music mixing with the sound of the rain. She didn't know what the future held, whether she would become famous or fade back into a quiet life. But she knew one thing for sure. She had found her way back to who she was meant to be. As she played her final notes for the night, she smiled to herself. The restaurant was empty, but the sound filled the space like a gentle heartbeat. And for Lena, that was enough. Because sometimes it's not the size of the audience that matters, but the courage it takes to let your heart be heard. Days turned into weeks, and Lena's life started to settle into a new rhythm, one that balanced both her job at the restaurant and her growing passion for music. She still worked long hours, still served tables with her warm smile, but now there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Customers noticed it too. Many came back just to see her play, while others shared stories about how her music had touched them. It was strange for Lena to be recognized for something she had once kept hidden. Yet every time someone thanked her, she felt a quiet pride that reminded her why she started playing again. One evening, after a busy shift, Lena sat in the small staff room, scrolling through her phone. Her latest performance video had reached over 100,000 views online. The comments were filled with kind words, people saying her music had made them cry, that it gave them peace, or that it reminded them of their own struggles. She read each message carefully, her heart full. For years she had worked quietly, unseen, but now her story was giving others hope. That thought meant more to her than applause or fame ever could. Later that night, while walking home, she stopped by the old park where she used to go with her father. The benches were wet with dew and the air was cool. She sat there for a while, listening to the distant sound of traffic, remembering the days when she dreamed of becoming a pianist. Back then it seemed impossible. Life had pulled her in a different direction. But somehow the music had found its way back to her. She smiled softly at the memory of her father's words. No matter how far you go, the music will always wait for you. He had been right. A few days later, she met again with the woman who had contacted her about recording. They met in a small studio on the edge of the city. It wasn't fancy, but it had everything she needed: a piano, a microphone, and a quiet space where she could be herself. The woman explained that they wanted to record a few of Lena's original pieces and share them online under her name. She didn't expect to make much money from it, but she hoped it might inspire others who felt like giving up on their dreams. Recording wasn't easy. The first few takes were full of mistakes. Lena's hand shook from nerves and she kept apologizing, even though no one blamed her. The sound engineer was patient, reminding her to breathe and take her time. "You don't have to be perfect," he said kindly. "You just have to be honest." That line stayed with her. The more she focused on playing from her heart instead of trying to impress, the smoother everything became. After hours of recording, the final track was ready. Lena listened to it through the studio speakers. Hearing her own music so clearly, with every small detail captured, felt surreal. She closed her eyes as the melody played, the one she had written during her loneliest days, and for a moment she felt as though her past and present had finally met. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about healing. When the song was released online, it quickly gained attention. People shared it across platforms, calling it the song that speaks without words. Listeners from different countries left messages about how it made them feel less alone. Some said it reminded them of lost loved ones. Others said it gave them hope to start over. Lena was amazed by how something that came from her quiet heart could reach so many people she would never meet. The attention brought new opportunities: small interviews, invitations to play at local concerts, even a few sponsorship offers. But Lena didn't chase fame. She still preferred her quiet life, walking to work in the morning, greeting familiar faces at the restaurant, and sitting at the piano after hours. Her coworkers often teased her, calling her our star, but she always laughed and said, "I'm still just the waitress who loves to play." Still, deep down, she knew things were changing. Her story had started spreading beyond the city. One afternoon, she received an email from a music foundation that supported underprivileged children. They wanted her to perform at their annual gala, not for money but as a symbol of hope for young dreamers. The message said, "We want the children to see what courage and perseverance can create." Lena agreed immediately. It felt like the right thing to do. For days she practiced after work, choosing the perfect piece for the occasion, something soft and meaningful. On the night of the gala, the hall was full of people dressed elegantly, with lights shimmering across the stage. But what caught Lena's attention most were the children sitting in the front row, their faces full of wonder. She saw herself in them, the same curiosity, the same hunger to dream. When she began playing, the room grew quiet. The melody told her story, of struggle, of loss, of finding light again. She played as if speaking directly to those children, telling them that no matter how small they felt, their dreams mattered. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. But it wasn't the sound that moved her, and it was the look in the children's eyes. They smiled and waved at her, some even clapping with tears on their cheeks. In that moment, Lena felt complete. After the performance, the foundation director approached her. "You've done something beautiful tonight," he said. "You reminded everyone that talent isn't defined by where you start, but by the heart you carry." He offered her a chance to work with their program, teaching children who couldn't afford music lessons. Lena's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. It wasn't something she had ever imagined, but it felt right. She wanted to give others what life had once given her: hope through music. In the months that followed, Lena became a part-time music mentor for the foundation. Every weekend, she spent hours with children from different backgrounds, teaching them how to express themselves through sound. Some were shy, some mischievous, but all were eager to learn. She told them not to worry about being perfect, only about being sincere. Watching them progress reminded her why she loved music in the first place. Her life was still humble, the same apartment, the same restaurant, but her world felt so much bigger now. She had become part of something larger than herself. The piano that once sat forgotten in the corner of the restaurant had become the bridge that connected her to countless lives. One rainy afternoon, Lena was sitting by the window at home sipping tea when she received a letter. It was from a music conservatory she had once applied to as a teenager, but never attended because of her family's struggles. They had seen her performances and wanted to honor her with a small award for inspiring others through her journey. Reading the letter, she couldn't stop smiling. It wasn't about the recognition, it was about coming full circle. The girl who once thought her dreams were over had become an example of resilience. At the ceremony, she stood on stage holding the award, looking out at the crowd. The applause echoed around her, but in her mind she saw only one face, her father's, smiling proudly. She whispered softly, "I made it, Papa." It wasn't about fame or money or attention. It was about staying true to what she loved. That night she returned to the restaurant. After closing, when everyone had left, she sat at the piano one more time. The air was still, the lights dim. She played the same song she had performed years ago, the one that had changed everything. Each note carried a memory, a lesson, a piece of her soul. As she played, she realized something. The world might forget faces and names, but it never forgets a song that comes from the heart. When she finished, she sat quietly for a long moment, hands resting on the keys. She didn't know what the future would bring. More performances, maybe a record, maybe just quiet nights at the restaurant. But whatever came next, she would face it with gratitude. The door creaked open and her manager peeked in with a smile. "Still playing?" he asked. She laughed softly. "Always." He nodded, turning off the last light as he left. The only sound left was the gentle hum of the piano as Lena played one last tune before heading home. It wasn't for anyone else, just for herself. And in that quiet room, filled with echoes of dreams reborn, her music spoke louder than words ever could. Months passed since Lena received the award from the conservatory, and though life looked much the same from the outside, everything inside her had changed. She still worked at the restaurant, still played the piano after hours, but there was a quiet peace in her now, a calm that came from knowing she had finally made peace with her past. Music was no longer a dream she chased. It had become the rhythm of her days, the voice of her heart. The restaurant was busier than ever. People came from different parts of the city just to hear her play. Some would make reservations weeks in advance, and whenever she performed, the room fell silent as if time itself paused to listen. The manager often joked that her music brought more people in than the food. Lena would blush and smile, but she never let the attention go to her head. To her, every performance was personal, a gift she gave from the same small place inside her where her love for music had first begun. One evening, a young girl came up to her after she finished playing. She looked about 10, clutching a small notebook to her chest. "I want to learn the piano like you," the girl said softly. Lena knelt down and smiled, telling her that she could, that anyone could if they played with heart. The girl's mother thanked her and said they had started coming just to listen, because her daughter couldn't afford lessons but learned by watching Lena play. That simple moment touched Lena deeply. She realized how her music had started reaching people far beyond what she could see. The next day, she brought an old keyboard from her apartment to the restaurant and asked the manager if she could set it aside for children who wanted to learn. "We'll call it the music corner," she said with a hopeful grin. The manager agreed instantly. From then on, once a week, Lena spent her evenings teaching children for free. They came shyly at first, unsure of themselves, but soon their laughter filled the air as they learned their first notes. Watching them reminded her of her own childhood, the excitement, the wonder, and the joy of discovery. The local newspaper heard about her classes and did a small feature story titled, "The Waitress Who Brings Music to Everyone." The article spread quickly, and people from nearby towns began visiting the restaurant. Some donated instruments. Others offered to volunteer. What had started as a small act of kindness grew into something beautiful, a community built around music and hope. Even with all the attention, Lena remained humble. She never forgot where she had come from or how uncertain things once felt. Late at night, when the restaurant was quiet, she would still sit at the piano, close her eyes, and play softly to herself. The melodies were different now, gentler, wiser. They carried traces of all the people she had met and the lessons she had learned. One winter evening, she received an unexpected letter. It was from the same concert organizer who had discovered her months ago. He wrote that a national music festival was coming up, and that he wanted her to perform as one of the featured artists. It would be her first time playing on a grand stage with professional musicians. For a moment, Lena felt that old nervous flutter in her chest. She wasn't sure if she was ready for something so big. But then she thought about all the people who had believed in her, the children, her co-workers, her father's memory, and she knew she had to say yes. The weeks leading up to the festival were full of long practice sessions and quiet reflection. She didn't want to perform a complicated piece. She wanted to play something true. After many late nights at the piano, she decided to compose a new song. A piece that told her story, not through words, but through sound. It began softly like a whisper, and built into something full of emotion, hope, loss, courage, and rebirth all woven together. The night of the festival arrived, and the grand hall shimmered under golden lights. Lena stood backstage, her heart pounding as she listened to the applause from the audience. When her name was announced, she took a deep breath and stepped into the light. The stage was vast, and the piano gleamed under the spotlight. For a moment, she felt small. But then she looked out at the faces in the crowd, strangers waiting to hear her story, and something inside her settled. She sat down, placed her fingers gently on the keys, and began to play. The first notes floated softly through the hall. The music carried memories of late nights washing dishes, of quiet tears, of laughter shared with coworkers, of children learning to play their first chords. Every sound was a piece of her journey. As she played, the audience grew silent. Some closed their eyes, others smiled, and some wiped away tears. It was as if her heart spoke directly to theirs. When the final note faded, there was a moment of perfect stillness before the entire hall erupted in applause. People stood clapping, cheering, calling her name. Lena looked up, her eyes shining with tears. She had never imagined this moment, never dreamed she would one day play for such a crowd. She bowed deeply, her heart full. Backstage, she was surrounded by musicians and organizers congratulating her. One of them said, "Your music isn't just beautiful, it's real. It makes people feel something true." Those words stayed with her long after the night ended. When she returned home, she placed the program booklet from the festival on her small shelf beside a photo of her father. "We did it," she whispered with a smile. Then she sat down at her keyboard and began to play again. Not for an audience, not for recognition, but simply because it was who she was. Over time, Lena's story became known far beyond her city. She received letters from people all over the world, teachers, students, parents, each sharing how her music had touched their lives. Some even sent photos of their children learning piano. Inspired by her journey, she replied to as many as she could, always writing from the heart. Despite her growing recognition, she never left the restaurant. It remained her safe place, her reminder of where it all began. The piano there had become a symbol, a reminder that greatness can rise from the most ordinary places. People who visited for the first time often looked surprised when they realized the famous pianist they had heard about was still serving tables with a kind smile. But Lena wouldn't have it any other way. Music had taught her that humility and beauty often go hand in hand. One spring night, long after closing, she sat by the window of the restaurant, watching the rain fall outside. The piano sat nearby, quiet but inviting. She walked over, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. The melody was soft, like a conversation between her and the night. She thought about all that had happened, the struggles, the fear, the small victories, and the people who had crossed her path. Each note was a thank you to them all. Her co-worker entered quietly and listened for a while before saying, "You never stop playing, do you?" She smiled. "How could I? It's the only way I know how to speak." He nodded, leaving her alone with the music again. The rain outside blended with her tune, and the whole world seemed to listen. As the years went by, Lena continued teaching, playing, and inspiring. She never became a celebrity, but her name carried meaning wherever it was spoken. She was the waitress who once walked to a piano in a crowded restaurant and changed not just her life, but the lives of everyone who heard her. Her legacy wasn't in fame or fortune, it was in hearts that dared to dream again. One evening, as she closed the piano after another long day, she whispered softly to herself, "This is enough." She smiled, knowing that sometimes the simplest dreams lead to the most beautiful stories. And as the lights dimmed and the restaurant grew quiet, the piano stood still, its keys holding the echo of her journey, a reminder that courage, kindness, and a single moment of music can change everything.